Boom. All right. Good morning, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming to an early session. I know it's kind of tough, especially around this festival with all the activities happening everywhere, as well as the conversation into the evening. But I thought we'd just jump right in. We'll quickly, obviously, the panel is thrilled to be here. I'm going to save the introductions, mainly because they're going to perhaps introduce briefly about themselves, but also a lot of their bios is in the program. But the Twitter's on the screen, if we do have a little bit on the screen now. Anyway, I trust it'll eventually be there, and boom. So the panel's up there with Twitter. If you are moved to tweet anything, those are our handles as well. Because we're going to be talking about engagement this morning, we thought we'd start off with a part of that engagement. So I would encourage folks to perhaps come together with people that they don't know. We have enough room in this room to be able to perhaps stand up and maybe perhaps come a little bit closer to the stage, and it'll also look better on camera, honestly. We'll have the front area, but also sit with somebody you don't know, and we want to spend 3 minutes. And again, I know it's early in the morning, but we just want to ask for 3 minutes of your time to talk amongst yourselves with somebody you don't know, to answer the question of what does engagement mean to you. Yeah? All right, 3 minutes and counting. Blah, 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 blah.
What?
I know this is going to be great on YouTube. So for our YouTube listeners, what's happening right now is that we've asked the audience to talk amongst themselves, to talk about what engagement means to them.
I know, it's a little...
So you might hear in the background that people are talking in the room about what engagement is. So for our YouTube listeners, perhaps what you can do is maybe call a friend, if you're with somebody in your room, to actually ask what engagement means to you too as well. And then tweet at Philip, no, I'm kidding. Tweet with the hashtag, and to answer the question yourself, what does engagement mean to you? Yes, to our YouTube listeners, thank you very much. I'll repeat this message again in about 1 minute. I think I'm having too much fun this morning.
Pardon?
I think I'm having too much fun this morning.
Yeah, I think so. That's great.
So again, for our YouTube listeners, what we're asking, it might be a little odd to what's happening right now on YouTube, but what's happening is that we've asked the audience to discuss the question, what does engagement mean to you? So the audience, for about 1 more minute, is discussing that question. And what we're encouraging our YouTube listeners is to answer that question on Twitter using the hashtag IJF18. So just a heads up, we have a 20-second warning that we will stop the conversation in 20 seconds so we can wrap up the conversation. All right. Thank you so much. What? That's great. Somebody blew the horn. That's amazing. Excellent. What a facilitator this Jesikah Maria Ross is. Thank you so much again for the folks on YouTube and just was kind of baffled what was going on, or even people who just walked in. What we did was we just asked the audience to just briefly discuss for 3 minutes what engagement means to them. And what we want to do at this for the next 2 minutes or so is just to hear maybe the top 5 sort of things that you heard in that discussion. So we'll take raise of hands of people who just want to share that answer, and we're gonna have pass the mic. Thank you for being on a ball on that. And just to respond to that question, what engagement means to you? Who wants to respond? Maeve.
We were talking about it being a kind of dialogue and conversation. So rather than the news media telling the audience what they want to hear, being much more of a kind of listening, two-way conversation. And I was exploring what that could mean in the context of investigative journalism as well, which is so often almost kind of prescriptive and dictatorial about this is what you need to know. And it could be much more, what do you want to know and what can you tell us?
Perfect. Who else?
We had a great conversation on making sure engagement is really a long-term process embedded in every stage of a journalistic process. Maybe the role of that journalist as a facilitator in listening to the community throughout that whole process.
All right, one more. One more. Maybe perhaps somebody not within the FCG program. Anybody in the back? A lot of shy people this morning. It's early. I hear you. All right. Well, let's move on. Again, I appreciate the participation, and clearly, I think for maybe some folks that might have not answered because there is a lack of definition, right, around engagement. And when I even think about that, certain words come out, right? It's community, it's building trust. I heard conversation. There's other terms like reciprocity that people have mentioned in the past. The short of it is that engagement means different things to different people. And I at the University of Oregon's School of Journalism and Communication, I guess I should quickly introduce myself, that as Andrea DeVigal, I hold the chair in journalism, innovation, and civic engagement. So this notion of civic engagement and the role of journalists in that ecosystem is really what we've been thinking about. And I just want to quickly share, because there's multiple definitions of engagement, one of the things I wanted to kind of explore is, for me, there is a distinction between transactional engagement and relational engagement. And in the bottom half of this chart, you'll see that for most, I think, at least for the last few years, we think about engagement as more transactional, right? It's the number of followers we get on Twitter or on Facebook, how many endorsements on the articles that we get in the social shares, right? Those are all, in my mind, transactional engagement. And what really excites me in the work that we're doing is really thinking about the relational engagement. And we heard this idea of participation or even collaboration with our public, in our audiences, in our communities. And perhaps identify projects that have community members lead the information health of their community, right? How do they become, how do we distribute the ownership of that information ecosystem to those who we are intentionally serving, right? Another notion of, sorry, these clickers really fast. Another notion that we highlight is this role, the dualities of journalism and communities, right? And the role of journalists of strengthening those practices, the capacity within the institution. And then looking at communities and recognize the plural definition of communities is that we're talking about multiple communities. We can be talking about, and this is something that we've worked on in our workshop, was the community of interest, right? Or communities of topics, communities along racial or economic lines, or somebody had mentioned communities of emotion, right? People who are affected by certain issues that's affecting them. And then the intersection between the two is really what we look at as engagement, right? How do we support that relational and less transactional engagement between the two, which leads to this sort of civic communication ecosystems that we can envision to help support the health of our communities. And then I want to leave it off with like 3 quotes that really kind of resonate with this kind of work. One from the Democracy Fund, where we're really looking at a shift of journalism and a refinement of journalism where newsrooms are interacting with community members. And we kind of mentioned, we kind of heard that in this morning's share back from that conversation. And speaking of conversation, it is this conversation with our communities. Joy Mayer, who's the community manager for a platform that we developed at Agora called Gather, which, no plug, we also have no postcards about what this Gather is, and it really is this platform to help support this community of practice of engaged journalism. So I'd encourage you folks to take a look at that as well. But her quote and her thinking about is the role of journalists is to have conversation that is informed by the story that we tell with the community, that also leads to more stories, right? That was further sparked by these conversations. And then the final 3rd quote was this notion from Jeff Jarvis that he wrote earlier this year, especially when the whole Facebook changes was happening. He put out there a new definition, a proposed new definition of journalism. And again, Jeff Jarvis, who's not a stranger to this festival, obviously, he wrote about how convening communities into civil, informed, and productive conversation, reducing polarization, which clearly is a building issue, and to help build trust, right? To find that common ground in facts and understanding. And I so resonated with this idea of journalists' role of finding common ground in facts and understanding, in so much that because thanks to you like that transition? Thanks to the support from the Robert Bosch Foundation, as well as the News Integrity Initiative at CUNY, we've been able to partner with the festival as well as Zeit Online to launch an initiative around that we're calling Finding Ground. And you can learn more about that in some of the things that we'll be sharing today. But in essence, it is a project that will support a cross-border collaboration with projects from Europe as well as North America to be able to facilitate opportunities for us as a community and as a people to look away, to look up from the devices that we so often sort of fall into, and really have these face-to-face engagement to find that common ground that really connects us, right, as a community. So this project, we did an open call several months ago, and from that open call, we were able to bring together 7 projects, and we're able to support them with small mini grants for them to push their initiative, as well as find opportunities for them to connect with each other by visiting each other in their sites. So that's what we'll be doing this summer. And it's a privilege for me to be able to bring together 2 of those projects, as well as Zeit Online, to be able to foster this cross-border collaboration and to be able to learn from each other on how do we facilitate these conversations with our communities. First up, I'm privileged to introduce Jessica Marie Ross from Capital Public Radio, and she'll be talking about her project in Sacramento, California.
Great, thank you very much. Do you need to be on one of these? There we go. Huzzah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out. I'm super excited to be part of this panel and to be part of Finding Common Ground and to share with you a little bit of what I'm up to. Let me see, here we go. So I want to start off by just telling you a little bit about myself. I come out of a background in community development and art, and I bring that together with journalism. And so what I like to say is I kind of work at that crossroads where we bring together those 3 different disciplines to create new ways to engage and involve our communities through public radio. So I work at Capital Public Radio, which is an affiliate of our national broadcasting system in the US. And Capital Public Radio is in Sacramento, California. So that's where I am. And one of the things that I have been working on, I'm the senior community engagement strategist, and I work mostly in a documentary unit called The View From Here. And it's a multi-platform documentary unit, so we make work that goes on air, online, and on the ground through through exhibitions, through presentations, and through experiences, and that's a lot of the work that I create and produce. And most recently, we spent the last year and a half really digging in to the housing crisis in our community, and we looked at the history, the politics, and economics of Sacramento's housing crisis. And we came up with a project called The View from Here, Place and Privilege. Oh, okay, I'm on. I'm gonna use this one, so I realize. So let me see, I think I'm on a different, there we go. So let me just say a little bit about the housing crisis. So Sacramento, where I live, like a lot of cities across the United States, really is gripped by this housing crisis. Sacramento is particularly hit hard. In the last 2 years, we have the fastest rising rents in the entire country. We've got an exploding homeless population, skyrocketing home prices so that most folks can't afford to buy a home. And on top of that, like a lot of places maybe where you live, our less desirable neighborhoods are really mostly made up of refugees, immigrants, and communities of color. And so what we really figured out is that residents from all walks of life were really impacted by the housing crisis, but in very different ways, and maybe didn't even have a sense of how they all share and connect into this crisis. So we wanted to create a common ground, a forum, to bring people together to share with each other their experiences and really figure out how to find a way forward. And so we came up with this idea of story circles, really an experiment in what I call deep listening, radical hospitality, and bridge building. Now, a story circle is probably a lot what it sounds like. It's folks sitting in a circle, right? Sitting together, exploring their experience with housing and home, guided by a facilitator, which was myself. And each participant was invited to share a personal story, not data, not opinions, not agendas, a personal story about a time when having a home made a difference in their life. And this simple process, deceptively simple, right? It really opened up this space for people to share their struggles, their hopes, and their dreams and fears. And that really created an emotional intimacy in the room and a lot of social bonding among people that were wildly diverse who usually wouldn't be in the same room together. After everyone shares a story, the group then explores what they heard and what it means. And by the end, people really have a sense of what they have in common as well as what's different, and start thinking about why start analyzing those differences. And then they get to start talking about creative solutions and responses and next steps. So we don't record the stories. Oh, I wonder if this can go. Yeah, let me see if this will work. I didn't test this out, so.
Go to the next.
I'm going to try and go online right quick.
Okay. I think we split the screen.
Oh. Can you do what? So I'll just speak over here for a second. Did that work?
Yep.
So we didn't record the stories, but what we did was we had a mobile portrait booth, and so people were invited. Do you want to go up and down it?
Yep.
Thank you. Co-piloting. So what we did is we had this mobile portrait studio, and people were invited before the story circle and after to have a professional portrait taken, and we gave them a complimentary copy. And they could also write some responses to prompts around belonging, around community well-being, and how that connects to housing and home. All right, we can go on back. And then, of course, what we did is I put those together. I made a community voice platform on the project website. So alongside the journalist voices, we had the community voices. And then all of those folks, I'll go back to this one. All of those, many of those people who we worked with, they have Instagram, they have Facebook, so we would tag them and they could share it out with their organizations, their families, their neighborhoods, their networks. So let me now try that. All right. You love technology when it works. So let me give you a sense. Let me try and give you a sense of what some of the folks had to say. Thank you, about this process. I love it. Come with me everywhere. I have to tell you that I have glasses and the numbers here are so infinitesimal. I feel like my grandmother.
You have 143.
All right, I'll just start it. Going forward.
Initially, I felt a little bit awkward and out of place because I've never been homeless. I've never lived in an affordable housing community, and I thought maybe I'm not part of this group and I don't have anything to contribute. But then I realized it's not about, you know, what I have to contribute or need to do. Even just listening to people, it's very, it's moving, and it opens up your horizons to other people's experiences. And it was amazing.
It's that face-to-face, it's that intimacy and that emotion that kind of all comes together where you're just like, wow, this is like a really powerful issue that really affects, like, you know, people who are sitting right next to you.
I think we all vibed in there. I think everybody had a chance to shed a tear or shed some light on different classes of life and recognizing that it's just not the poor folks that are affected by housing.
So I wanted to give you a sense from the people in the room in terms of what their experience was. And what I want to share with you in creating these story circles, again, bringing together art, community development, and journalism, is that we kind of came up with a methodology that really focuses on 3 areas. One I call hospitality. So that has a lot to do with, let me get this going here. Actually, let me back up a second, because this is an important point. Whoops, there we go. There we go. My radio station, Capital Public Radio, partnered with 12 groups to coordinate and host these story circles. So it's done in collaboration, deep collaboration with these organizations. And we had them at spaces, not at our station, but at spaces throughout Sacramento. So homeless organizations, community centers, affordable housing complexes. And the design focused on 3 key strategies. One is around hospitality. So you were greeted when you came in, you were introduced immediately to other people. There was food, there was music, there was a sense of, hi, welcome to my home, let's get to know each other. The other was an attention to beauty. There were flowers, there were colorful tablecloths, there was lighting, candles, a way in which when you came in, you noticed, even in an affordable housing complex with linoleum floors and white walls, you felt like, oh, this isn't just your usual meeting. Something's been created for me. And then the third was intentional curation. This is really important and also takes the most work. So our community partners invited half of the people hit hardest by the housing crisis, people on the front lines, the people they serve, their staff, the communities around the neighborhoods where we lived. And then my radio station, we invited the other half. So there are people who have access to more resources, tend to vote, become more engaged in community life. Also, I've tried to have a millennial, a housing developer, and an elected official, so that we could have this, you know, really diverse spectrum of voices in the room telling personal stories of housing and home. So that was the intentional curation. And what we found is that it was amazingly effective in a couple of key areas that we wanted to know about. Does this work in community engaged journalism build empathy? And we found, yes, it does. We didn't have a large population. These are small story circles of 15 people each. So in a universe of about 70 people, 84% said that they built more empathy through the process. Over 80% said they met someone new, heard a different perspective, and connected with somebody that they otherwise would never have met. Same amount of people also talked about how they had a much deeper understanding of the root causes of the housing crisis, different impacts of it, and how it hits different community members in different ways. And then what was really blew our hair back was about 90% of the people said that they had an intention to take a next step. So what we are doing now is through the Finding Common Ground project, connecting back with our 12 community partners and saying, okay, how do we build this out? How do we work with you? We're going to come together and build a cohort, about 15 to 20 people. We're going to learn the story circle methodology and improve it. And then what we'll do is go out and do more story circles, come back together, and based on our assessment and learning and like on-the-ground experience, we're going to co-create a guide that's downloadable that can go out to anybody who wants to facilitate a story circle on housing and home. And you know, what we're really looking to do is build community capacity to bring diverse residents together to listen, learn, and act. And in the process, generate a greater sense of connection and trust among residents, partners, and our public radio stations, so that ultimately we can all be working together to develop our communities, improve conditions of community life through our journalism. So if you want to continue to talk about that, that's how you get a hold of me. Thank you so much.
Okay, awesome. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Andrea Wenzel. I'm a faculty member at Temple University in Philadelphia, but I'm actually here today to talk about a project I'm working on with a team of folks in rural Kentucky called Community Storytellers. Working with a great group of folks there, my colleague Sam Ford, and also the Ohio County Monitor. So where the heck is that? So Kentucky is on the upper left in the red. That's Kentucky. Ohio County, Kentucky is not in Ohio. It's in Kentucky. It's the one on the bottom. And on the map, as in life, they are both red, as in they voted Republican in the 2016 elections. I think it was like 70-something% voted for Trump. And this project that we're working on came from a question: what is life like for that 20% who voted for Clinton? What is life like in areas that might be red on a map, but it's more complicated than that? What does political polarization look like at the local level? And so we wanted to kind of look at that and say, okay, if we all know by now that the well might be poisoned at the national level in terms of everybody's watching different national television programs or other things like that, but are people reading the same local newspapers? Are they sharing spaces? Are they going to the same churches? What ways might they be still sharing resources, and is there any opportunity for expanding upon those? So we did a research study where we wanted to ask that, and it's kind of grounded, both the study that we did and the intervention projects that we've followed up are grounded in this idea of communication infrastructure theory, and I won't get into the academic weeds with this, but basically it's looking at how in every community you have a storytelling network. So you have residents, community organizations, and local media that are all connected, that are all telling stories about their community and circulating stories about their community. And researchers have shown that in areas where those connections are stronger between those groups, there tends to be a shared understanding of what issues are happening in your community and also a stronger sense of civic participation. So we wanted to kind of ask, so has the political situation, has partisan divides affected the storytelling networks in these areas? And so we did a study in, in this area of Kentucky, where we did a series of focus groups, and we invited people to keep diaries, and then we did interviews with them, and found indeed there has been some effect of the political situation has affected people's storytelling networks, particularly. And of course, they're reading and consuming different media at the national level, but also it's affecting people's interpersonal networks. It's affecting people's sense of self-censoring online and offline. So people talked about, oh, I don't go to the same church anymore because I had this issue, or I have to be careful when I bump into people at the soccer game or whatever. So it really was affecting people. When it came to local news, though, the interesting thing was people on both sides of the political divide were sharing some of the same newspapers, same local news outlets. And there were, they were saying, local news is not perfect here, there's not enough resources, but at the same time, we have more trust in that than we do the national news. people said that we'd really like it if the local news was a little bit more constructive about community issues, and that there was more possibility for participating in the process of making stories. The other thing that people talked about was a sense of feeling that they really wish there was more like full representations of people in their community, that there wasn't a sense that, especially with the national media, that they weren't being represented well, and there wasn't any nuance to how they were represented. And so from all of these findings, we put forward some recommendations. We said, can there be opportunities for local media to have more nonpartisan solutions-oriented coverage that's more engaged with community members and that invites residents to participate in the process? And so we invited local journalists, community organizations, and people who participated in the study to kind of come together and say, okay, tell us what you would like to do. What projects would be helpful for you to address some of these things? And so they brainstormed some project ideas. And then we, this is Dustin and Lee Bratcher. They run the Ohio County Monitor. They are a two-man, two-brother operation. And they cover this gigantic county by themselves, and they are pretty amazing. And they wanted to, they said, okay, we're up for trying anything. Like, let's try some of these engagement projects. And maybe they'll help us with our subscriptions too. Who knows, we'll see. So the two main projects that we're looking at with them now that they're trying to get off the ground, the first one is this idea of reimagining the society columnist and thinking of it as, so society columnist is a pre-Facebook tradition where somebody would kind of report on in their particular neck of the woods, so-and-so had a baby, so-and-so had a guest from out of town, but also so-and-so is not well and they need some help, you know, so it was how you found out what was happening in your community. And so they're like, okay, we need to know what's happening in these areas. We can't get to them all. So let's have community contributors reimagine what this could look like for us today. And so now they're doing that. They've got a group of people who are making they're saying, okay, we'll do this once a month. We'll write you a story. And they run the gamut as far as what kinds of stories they're about. This one about a retired band teacher has gotten like, I think got like 900 clicks in 2 days, which is more than most of their crime stories. It's a lot for them. So they're pretty happy with how it's going. And now with the Finding Common Ground initiative, we're really excited. They're going to expand the number of contributors, and they're going to hopefully incorporate members from different immigrant and refugee communities. The nearby community of Bowling Green is home of the Bowling Green Massacre. It's also a refugee resettlement area, and so there's people who come into Ohio County to work for the chicken processing plant. So they're going to be working with people from different backgrounds to participate in the Community Contributor Project now. And then finally, the other kind of fun initiative that they're working on is this idea of liars tables. So you may have seen this and not known you've seen this, but this idea of you go into an area and you have basically usually a bunch of old timers, usually older gentlemen sitting around talking about the news of the day, or as one of them told me, solving the world's problems. And these are spaces that we should say are not inclusive. They're always men, they're always white men. And there's probably a fair amount of people who would not feel so comfortable interacting in these spaces. But in these communities, these liars tables, which are a few tables and chairs set up in the back of a convenience store in these rural areas, it's really the only public square left. There's not other spaces to go and interact with people. So these are mostly farmers and coal miners, and this is how they find out what's happening in the community. And so what the OC Monitor's been doing is doing a liars table tour where they go around from one to the other, and they kind of use them as listening posts to find out what issues would you like to have covered, and then thinking about now how can we make a connection between these spaces where a lot of important information is circulating and their online audience, because these guys are not online, and how to kind of connect between those two and then kind of loop back to them. So through this project, they're going to be kind of trying to make that more systematic. And this, just in conclusion, I mean, one of the things we're really excited about with this is looking at it as a model, not in terms of a project that could be picked up and dropped and placed somewhere else, because I think they're very place-based. They're not scalable. We don't want them to be. But what we think is important is that we're trying to experiment with a process model, looking at how can you take research and then use that to inform a participatory project design process and then pilot some projects. So it's sort of looking at, is there a model of a process that we can look at where the projects are not scalable, but the process might be portable. So right now we're looking at this in Kentucky, but we're trying the process out in the Philadelphia area as well in a very different context. So we'll see how that goes. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I would like to share our idea of a dating platform for political dialogue, an international one. It's called My Country Talks, but before I do that, I would like to do a test with you. Who of you has ever used Tinder or similar dating platforms? Who has a friend who uses this? All right, okay. It's a very honest answer, I think. So, if you've ever used a platform like Tinder, you are aware of the power of matching algorithms when it comes to the idea of bringing total strangers together. So, here's our idea. What is if we use this power of algorithm to bring people together that are not totally strangers, but who have a very different political mindset, who have entirely divergent political opinions. So we don't use it for love or sex reasons, we use it for politics. So this is a quite crazy idea, I have to admit. But hopefully after my presentation, you will see that this works. Maybe we switch back to January 2017 when everything started in Germany, in Berlin, where I'm based. I'm editor at Zeit Online, which is one of Germany's leading news websites. We are a relatively small newsroom with 80 people. And in January 2017, we were quite scared because Donald Trump was elected, the Brexit had happened, so we had a long conference talking about what can we do now. And this situation was special for us because there was an election, upcoming election in this year. We had national elections in September 2017. And a lot of the problems we witnessed in the US and in the UK, we were also aware of them. We had the same problems. So you might know we have a right-wing populist party in Germany. It's called the AfD. They were pretty strong during that time. And we also witnessed the problem that there are parts of society that have forgotten to talk to other parts of the society. So this filter bubble problem also exists in Germany. So our question was, okay, what can we do? So we had this idea, let's make political Tinder, and let's bring people together with an entirely divergent political mindset and ask them to talk. During that time, we had 0 resources. Of course, there was no business model for that. But we just started it and started with an article. We put it on our website, I think it was in May. May we introduce you to someone. And in this article, there was a little box. And this box was asking our readers 5 questions, very simple yes or no questions. These are the questions. We thought that these are the most polarizing questions in Germany during that time. So the question, if Germany has accepted too many refugees, the question of nuclear energy, the question of the euro. So we chose this question for the ability to clearly separate our readers into two groups, so in the yes group and in the no group. And after asking these questions, we asked for some personal information. We asked for the zip code. We asked for their mobile phone number, which was quite important for us because we wanted to have real people in our database. And we asked for email address and some personal information. For example, we asked, what are you doing after work? Because we wanted to get a sense of the people that register. And then we said, afterwards we said, okay, now you answered this question, we will promise to find someone next to you who lives in your neighborhood that sees these questions totally different than you do. And we set up a date. We said it will happen at June 18th. So we will all meet at the same day and time. And we were absolutely not sure if this would work. I mean, people had to leave a lot of private information. And of course, for them, it's also an experiment. It's always an experiment to meet a total stranger, especially when he's like from the other side of the political spectrum. So what we said was, okay, if 50 people agreed to do this, we matched them by hand. If 500 subscribe, we will see. And if 5,000 subscribe, we have a problem. And so it turns out that we had a problem because after 4 weeks, 12,000 people did that. And no, this is too fast. So we asked our data scientists to build up an algorithm that makes the perfect match for these people. So the perfect match was like that. The perfect match was like 5 times yes meets 5 times no, and they live in the same street. So of course not always this happened, but a lot of times. And we had, I think, at the end, after cleaning the database, because there were some people who were too young, because you have to be 18 to do it, and so on, we had around 3,000 matches, pairs to meet up. And then we lost some of them on the way because we really wanted to make sure that they really exist and that they really want to meet and that they really agree. So in the end, we had 1,200 people meeting. And before they met, we gave them a little instruction how to have a proper conversation, have a good conversation, have a good debate. And we asked them to send selfies and feedback. So then it was June. It was a perfect day. It was sunny, brilliant. And the people really met. And this was a quite fantastic day for us because I think at 6 or something, when most of the talks ended, there was really like, my email box was like hundreds of mails and selfies coming in. And here are 6 of them. And the feedback was really enthusiastic. It was really, I was really surprised. It doesn't happen very often that you are in the newsroom and you are a journalist and you receive hundreds of mails with very positive feedback. But actually that happened during that day. So yeah, so we were pretty excited and we saw, okay, our political Tinder works. And here's another couple. So this was interesting because she's homosexual and is living in a homosexual relationship, and he's against gay marriage, homosexual. So they discussed. It was interesting. And he's a police guy, and he's, I think, an engineer. And oops. And this was also funny. I want to share this. This is a professor that was matched with his student. So the professor said there were too many refugees, and the student said, I don't agree, and then they sat down in his apartment, actually, and yeah, of course we covered that story. So yeah, so the reason why I'm here today is that after we did Germany talks, a lot of media from all around the world came to us and asked, hey, we want to do the same in our country because we have the same problems. It's a nice idea. Maybe we can do it in Austria, or we can do it in Argentina, or we can do it in the US. So at the same time, Google came to us and said, well, we have a bit of money, and maybe you could build up such a platform. And we said, yes, maybe we can do that. And now we're doing it. And it's called My Country Talks. And the idea is that when it's launched in early summer, every media in the world will be able to do such, may I have 1 minute more? We'll be able to do such an event in their country. So the platform will do everything for you if you are a media outlet somewhere in the world. We'll do the whole communication, we'll do the matching. It works like that this platform produces a small widget that you can embed on your website. You can create an event, set up a date whenever you want to. And we are, at the moment, we are in the stage where we are trying to find partners, and we are curating it a bit, but in the end it will be open to everybody. And yes, so my big hope here is that we will find a lot of partners who want to do it. We already have more than 20 partners all around the world. In Canada, La Repubblica in Italy, Morgenbladet in Norway. It will happen in Austria, probably in Switzerland. So if you want to share our little movement, you can write us an email or visit our website. Thanks a lot.
I apologize for that buzzer. But it came with a purpose because we really wanted to give some time for discussion and engagement. I mean, this is the heart of what we're talking about, right? So this idea of practicing engagement and having this facilitated conversation is such a key component to our belief of our role as journalists. And but I do have a question to kind of launch that, but as you're thinking about your question, I think we are going to anticipate, we'll have a microphone set up, and we'll be passing it around. So as you're thinking about your question, one general question I have as a whole for the panel is the fact that, you know, I love the fact that this panel is, it's made up of diverse publication size, right? From rural communities to much more larger scale and city in the capital of California. In basically the country of Germany. But despite any of those sizes, I suspect that many editors might have come to you when you pitch these ideas saying, what? This is our role as journalists? I mean, mind you, there are some organizations who turn off their commenting systems on their articles because they don't want to hear from their public, which is, anyway, it's not foreign for me to hear that. Right? So I would love to hear your response to those editors when you come to these ideas and said, this doesn't sound like journalism to me, or at least this is not our role within our community. What's your response to that? And anybody, please.
I'm a little fortunate, I think, because my organization, Capital Public Radio, is engaged in this big experiment by having me in the newsroom as a documentary artist and setting up a project, a job where I get to try these experiments. So there's a lot of fruitful friction between the work I do and the newsroom. What I do is often not considered journalism. At the same time, there's this desire for the kind of disruption, the new ideas that arise out of the collision between my background in community development and the model that I've developed, where I think somebody said it in the introduction exercise, we've developed a way in which we engage and involve the communities at the center of the story that we're telling and community partners throughout the life cycle of the project. So I think that when it comes to the story circles, it became a little challenging because we didn't record them. And the content that we created was on social media. And so the question a lot of editors had in particular, because I find editors are very focused on content that can go on air at, X time. And so I think the challenge became talking about kind of the long haul project, that by building relationships and forging connections in which people have these experiences that are so transformative and beautiful, and then connecting that experience with us. And then from there, going to our stories and coming back to us and staying in touch with us. That was a different way of looking at how we inform our journalism. So it's not so direct necessarily as a reporter sat in the story circle and made a story from it. It was, we now have a lot of people who didn't know us before. If they did, we were in communities that didn't trust us, and for good reason oftentimes. Now kind of seeing that we're willing to take time and energy to create this experience and basically demonstrate a commitment that benefits the partners and the participants as much or more than what goes on air. That's one idea.
Yeah. Okay, we can just go down the line. So for my situation, I'm usually coming to them as an outsider, and in this case, we asked people, what would you like to do? And so with a lot of times, the question of a barrier was a question of resources. So it's like, oh, that's a great idea, but do I have time? Or, in the case of the Ohio County Monitor, it's 2 guys running this thing, and they are the editors, they are the reporters, they are the everything. It's like, oh, that, they got into it because they cared about their community, so that's a natural fit to them, but how are they going to manage it was the question. At the same time, they had just shifted to a subscription model from an advertising model, and so they're like, well, who knows? At this point, we're willing to try anything, and maybe this will also have an effect of helping us with our subscription. And so, sure enough, to some extent, so the community contributors that they started doing this project, they've kind of functioned as ambassadors, like you're saying. They get invested in the project, and they tell their friends, and then it becomes something that balloons, and it's sort of restored the editor's faith that we can do something more than just doing obituaries and crime reporting. And I mean, we can do the stuff we really want to do, and that can also have a positive connection to our, sustainability questions. So there's still more to understand and know about that. Mm-hmm.
Well, my chief editor was a big fan of this project, and he still is. I mean, he's pushing it from the first beginning. But I think one reason for this is that the Zeit, like our weekly, but also Zeit Online, was always a platform for debate. Sees itself as a platform for debate. So it's, in a way, it's a very logical thing to do something like that, to initiate new ways of discussion in our country.
Shall we open it up to the audience? Any questions? Raise your hand so we can make sure that the microphone is passed around. Or comments. Greg.
Hi, thank you. Great panel. Philip, I want to adopt your project in the community that I cover, but I'm not sure that I want to build it around political polarization. I'm not sure that that's really the issue in that community. Maybe a newcomer in the community with someone that's been there for a while, or someone who has a positive take on the community with someone who has a negative take. Do you think your platform can be gamed by manipulating the questions in that way? Are you open to that? And I'm just curious if Andrea in Ohio County and Jesikah in Sacramento were to adopt a similar thing, what questions would you want your audience to engage on such a topic, such a platform?
Well, yeah, at the moment we are trying to build up this first version of it, and this is quite complex, but we are open to open it up. I mean, to develop it further. Of course, there's also the question: can we match people from the land side with people from cities? Because very often there's a huge divide. So is this possible? Or there's the question: can we match people from France with people in Germany, which, for example, would also be great. So I think we are at the first step now, and we'll see. Maybe we develop this platform, and then it will be possible one day.
I think that's a great. I'm glad you asked that question because I'm curious in the answer too. For Ohio County, I mean, political polarization is a salient thing there, but I would really. We've asked them what issues do you care about? What are your key issues? And I think what would be the most interesting way of framing it is to do something like this, but to frame it around an issue that is a shared concern, that people want to work on a solutions-oriented way. So either opioids, they've talked about doing something on issues of guns, or things that are charged, but looking at it from how can we improve the situation angle, and try to frame the conversation in that way, I think would be really interesting. So my station, Capital Public Radio, we're centered in Sacramento, but we actually serve the Central Valley of California, which is very huge, and the Sierra Nevada mountains. We actually go into the next state. So we have urban, suburban, and rural. And one of our challenges is how do we serve all of those communities as a public service journalism agency? And I think that I'm very fascinated and smitten, actually, with Philip's project, because I see it as a way to bring people together across geography, as well as across other possible divides. And I think that the Sacramento region in California, in a lot of ways, has positioned itself as the modern resistance to Washington, D.C.'s, the current administration. We actually regularly have a lot happening in terms of, there's basically lawsuits happening right now between California and D.C. all around the Dreamers and deferred action and unauthorized, or what are often referred to as undocumented folks. So I think that one question that we're, as a big region, there's a lot of different ways people come down on that very thick issue. So I think a question around do people support or not Dreamers having, the deferred action? So I'm trying to think of a way to say this question without going into the weeds. But I would say that something around undocumented would be one. I think gun control is another one. And actually, to throw one out that's very California, cannabis. Is another one that we have a lot of challenge around. And I think I'm really curious about this way in which we can frame the questions and the conversations so that while we think about people having very divergent views on it, and those views always come from experience, right? How do we position it towards imagining a solution together? I think that would be a really critical piece to go forward. And maybe that's already part of the project or the next phase of the project, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm also drawn, even though I'm a moderator, I'd love to respond because I'm drawn to this question of the polarization, because I work on apps and develop other engagements where, we're so focused on the polarized ends of these conversations, but I think it's the middle in between that really will offer these solutions, as you were mentioning, is how do we foster that? How do we amplify those voices in the middle as opposed to the polarized ends? And I'll be intrigued if there was a way to engage in both of these sort of process-oriented engagement as well as the technology-driven engagement tools to help sort of foster that, right, to amplify those voices. So thank you for your question, Greg. Any other, Careless, please.
Thank you. I also have a question about Philip's project, but I guess it's a question to everyone as well. So what's the actual goal of these meetings in your case? Do you want that people will leave each other with their views being changed? Or because when you work with a community who has different views, what's the actual goal? Do you want people to change their views, or should they understand each other, to understand that they can have different views and still be part of the same community? What's the actual goal? Thank you.
Well, I think does it work? Yeah. We don't want that people change their mind or their opinion. I mean, that's not our goal. What we would like to have is like a good debate, and at the end, and that happened last time, a lot of people have a better understanding for the position and the opinion of others. And also in Germany, there are parts of the society that are no longer speaking to other parts of the society. We really have this filter bubble issue. And I think this is for a community or a society, this is a dangerous thing if this happens. And well, so I think this is, at this point, it's a good thing to bring them together again, make them talk and see the world through the eyes of the other. I mean, this is also maybe a lesson in empathy or whatever. But in these feedback mails I mentioned, nearly everybody said, I expected the other one to be an extremist or to be a monster or whatever, especially when left liberal people met with people who were a member of the AfD or of this populist party. But then when they came together, they recognized that the difference aren't so big, and they recognized what were the presumptions of these opinions. And this was also interesting. Why does someone believe that there are too many refugees in this country? It's interesting to hear that. So I think these are 2 or 3 goals we had and still have.
As far as goals, for my project, I would say it's looking at how do you strengthen shared communication resources. So it's about how do you create an infrastructure where people can have a shared understanding about what's happening in their community. So in this case, strengthening the connection between community members and media, and because as you're talking about filter bubbles, if you have different, separate, isolated storytelling networks, and there's not a shared understanding of what are the community problems and how can we address them. So that's kind of the bigger picture, I think, that I'm interested in.
I love this question. I'm still puzzling through it a little bit. There are 3 things that come to my mind. One is that, like Philip said, I think that in the communities that I live and work, our democratic traditions and our shared decision-making is a bit broken. And part of that is because we live in very siloed lives, not just where we get our information, but actually who lives around us, who our kids go to schools with, what we do. And so I think one goal is to simply reweave the fabric of our communities by creating spaces and processes for people to speak and feel seen and heard in all of their dimensions. So I think there's some community building that in and of itself is very important. I think a next level of that is around the really the increased awareness and empathy that comes with humanizing issues, putting a face on the other that's not a monster or an extremist, and also the piece of empathy of actually sharing by telling these stories. You're sharing, if you're building empathy, you're sharing and being willing to take on the pain as well as the joy and the hope. And then how I think it all connects to that third level of what we're trying to do as a public radio station is play a key role in that process in people's lives, right? So if there's stories that people feel need to be told, that we are missing, that are being underreported or misrepresented, and that we have a way of hearing that and sharing that out, thinking about how we're telling stories and to whom and for whom. So it's this kind of other feedback loop that we are getting by facilitating this process. And I think that ultimately, if we can kind of go through those levels of, you know, building community, kind of raising awareness and helping build civic imagination through our public journalism, then we can hit our mission, which is to be this, this relevant and valued form of communication in people's daily lives.
If I can just drop the mic with that, I think we can do that. But I can't drop the mic with this thing. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? Even just sharing some of how you're reacting to these conversations would be very welcomed. And apropos.
This is kind of a follow-on, I guess, from Andrew's question, but it keeps coming back to me about the kind of, in English there's the saying, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? And I wonder about the broadcasting of some of these conversations or the recording of them. Is that a necessary step in making this journalism, or is it enough that people go off and have a conversation and you never hear about it when you don't record it?
I think that it's ideal if there are ways to generate content from the experiences. One could be to record some of them, but I think that changes the dynamic pretty fundamentally. I love what Philip's done, or have a follow-up and generate stories from it. I think the other idea I love is the community contributors, have people make their own responses. So I guess I think ultimately when I think of my newsroom and editors, there needs to be content. And I think for it to be, so I guess that's what I would respond to, that there needs to be content. I think there's a million ways that could happen, and I think it should come in different voices, in different ways.
I would just say I think there's other goods that come from this aside from content that are just as that are valuable for society. And I'm interested not in saving journalism, but journalism as a means to an end. So, and I have a bit of a luxury of being able to say that, of not having to pay for a newsroom. But I think for a newsroom that these things are building relationships. You know, they're building relationships with their publics, and it's not always going to be maximum content, but it could lead to other things, even if there's not a ton of content coming out of that particular encounter. So I think there's other ways of it's building trust, it's building relationships too. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and some of these stories are really great stories. Totally strangers meeting for political discussion, and then don't know what will happen. They meet each other for the first time, shaking hands, maybe changing their opinion, maybe changing the way they see life, and that's interesting. We will have a follow-up of this Germany talk. We will visit people that did it last year and ask them now how they feel, if there were friendships now, if there are friendships, new friendships now. Is there any contact between the people that discussed during the time? And I'm very curious to see if there is any long-time effect.
There was a question over there. Can I see a 5-minute warning?
Okay,
So
thank
one or two
you.
more questions. Thank you.
So I'm a relative newcomer to journalism. I just started about 2 years ago, and my background is mostly as a community organizer. And so as a journalist, I'm always finding this real missing piece, and so I'm just very heartened to hear what I've heard today. So firstly, just thank you. Also, through doing this work, I'm realizing how really resource-intensive it is and labor-intensive it is just to do conventional journalism. And so I'm curious to know more about finding the resources to really do this engagement work well, and just any thoughts or ideas about that. Thank you.
Go.
All right. Well, thank you for asking. So here's my pitch. So about a year ago, we did get funding from the Knight Foundation as well as from the Democracy Fund to actually launch a platform called Gather. So Gather is a project and platform to support the community-minded journalists and other engagement practitioners as community organizers as well. And the heart of Gather is really to bring together case studies around engaged journalism and to allow people to learn from how others have implemented like these 3 kinds of case studies. And how do you implement it within your own environment, right? And we're very discreet in Gather in that it's not a cookie cutter solution. You can't just take one idea and apply it to your own local environment. And we really want to encourage a way to look at the kit of parts or the individual pieces that really allow for these kinds of really community-centric engagement and to learn from them in individual ways. And we're also, a part of why I think this platform is key is the fact that we're also bringing the community of practice of engaged journalism to learn from each other. So we're using the platform as well as a Slack group to be able to ask questions and to be able to find resources and to be able to find other techniques. So anyway, that's my plug for letsgather.in is the URL, and to learn more about that platform. But I also want to allow the
I'll just add on one. I think it's fantastic. I think journalism needs more community organizers, so I wish there were more people with that background. But just making a plug for thinking about partnerships, and if you don't have the resources in your own newsroom or your own situation, like, are there other groups that you can partner with, be it media outlets, be it community organizations, be it universities, other folks who have a common interest that you could collaborate with in some way? And of course, that takes time, that takes resources of its own, but if you can invest in that over the longer term, that might be a way of making it more sustainable.
I was going to say something very similar. I'm a one-person team in my station, and all the projects I do, I could only do because they're in deep collaboration with community partners and because I have an organizing background. So I think that would be a natural fit for you as well, to develop a model for your journalism that embeds the community partners in the life cycle of the project. I have found that to be one of the most, not only is it a way for resources, but ultimately it's how the impact is generated outside of our station. We rock when it comes to making powerful, crafted stories. Then they air and poof. But when we work in collaboration with partners who help us name and frame the issues and solutions and co-create our community engagement activities, then they own the whole process. They've helped make stories that are of relevance and use to them, and they take those stories forward, which all means that they're willing to invest time and resources to work with you in that process. Plus, one last note, funders at this moment, at least in the United States, tend to look favorably on those kinds of partnerships. And so while they may not fund a media project, they will fund a community development project so that your partners can get the resources to actually work with you, because that's usually the missing component. You're paid, but your partners often aren't. through journalism, but through funding, they can be paid, and then you can have a more equitable relationship.
So as an ending slide, I just wanted to share that this is, again, a part of a larger initiative. Thanks again to the Bosch Foundation, as well as the News Integrity Initiative at CUNY, to be able to look at 7 projects of finding common ground. There's also going to be another panel tomorrow morning at 9:30 at Hotel Brafani if you really wanted to discuss more about these kinds of initiatives and these kinds of engaged journalism. So thank you very much. Sure.
Can you get a picture of us?
Ask Jeff. You can ask Jeff.
Oh, yeah. That's right. We could ask Jeff, too.